Um, we're going to tackle the bishop's framework, and that sounds like a kind of an aggressive approach to things, doesn't it? I mean, it is a controversial document. That we would be saying, I'd be lying to say otherwise. And there is an attitude, and indeed, you could quote the good adage, if they give you lemons, you make lemonade. I think it has more potential than that, and especially if we receive this document into the life and faith of the church, which is precisely what we're supposed to do with it. In other words, this is not the only document that the church has issued about catechesis. God knows. I mean, beginning with 4 Gospels, the church has been issuing these kind of documents, official documents, for about 2,000 years now. And in the more recent documents of the church, I mean, the General Directory for Catechesis, which I think is a very fine document, by the way, 1997, 98, it got translated into English. A very fine document on how to approach evangelization and catechesis. So this document does not supersede the life of the church. The bishops themselves wrote a wonderful document. I think it was 1975. In fact, the title of my presentation last night was borrowed from there, To Teach as Jesus Did. So this document comes into the life of the church rather than as some kind of a fiat or a mandate that stands in isolation. And I do think if we approach it positively, it has potential and possibilities. I said to a group of bishops recently, talking about this, you wouldn't want us to teach bad theology now, would you? And they said, no. And I said, and you wouldn't want us to use poor pedagogy, would you? And they said, no. I said, fine, great. Then we can work with this document, especially if we bring good theology and good pedagogy to it. But I'm not going to launch into it immediately. I'll wind up a little and even pose the more generic question that is in the hearts and souls of all of us, and that is, what are we to do by way of high school age catechesis? What should we be up to in these young people's lives by way of handing on the faith to them? As I said last night, it's never been easy. And last night I mentioned some of the social and cultural realities, the fact that this postmodern society of ours is antithetical to meta-narratives and prefers complexity and diremption and diversity and all kinds of things. And are we all gone ADHD in a sense in this postmodern age where we don't think linear, et cetera, et cetera? So it's a different time, of course, and I said something about that briefly last night. But even from the point of view of the developmental stages in young people's lives, there's all kinds of extraordinary things going on. It's probably one of the most complex of the life stages, at least to my memory. It certainly was, and for most young people, it's an enormously complex time. We're shifting, or so we hope, from a more conventional way of making meaning out of life, simply accepting what they say, to much more of an owned, to an appropriated, to a personally owned type of knowledge or morals or faith. At least this is what the developmentalists like Keegan and Gilligan and Kohlberg and Fowler and these people, that there is extraordinary things going on in the lives of adolescents, which make, of course, and Aquinas always insisted that the best mode of communicating the gospel is not our favorite mode, but according to the mode of the receiver. So knowing the receiver and being empathetic and alert to how the receiver is making meaning out of it and approaching life, etc., is simply imperative for us, which makes it all the more complex. And the evidence, and again, we'll say this briefly because we touched on it last night, is that none of the mainline churches are doing so well, and maybe even us Catholics less so, which in a sense is phenomenal, really, given the tremendous school systems that we have, grade schools, high schools, still thousands of them in this country, colleges, great universities. I mean, we've got the largest independent educational system in the world, in the history of the world, the U.S. Catholic Church. So that we would be scoring so poorly on standardized tests by way of faith education and faith by way of linguistic competency, especially in matters of faith, is just how we have to face it. I don't know how to explain it. But it's not really consoling to say, yeah, everybody's doing poorly. I don't know if you saw the article, I think it was the New York Times last Sunday or the Sunday before. I made a copy of it to my students, which the Pew report, or I think it was Pew, that came out with a new study of religious literacy in the United States. And guess what? Atheists and agnostics scored better than people who go to church regularly. Now, wise people riddle me that. That atheists and agnostics actually knew. Now, you could critique the questions they were asking and how they framed the question. You can do that to every study, and I do. When somebody says to me, just look at the data, I say, yeah, but how is it collected? How is it being interpreted? But all that being said, it was not a happy report. So this document, in a sense, does confront us. And I don't think we can be just sanguine about it or self-righteous about it and say, oh, we were doing tremendous. You know, along comes this stupid document that sends us back to 1950. That wouldn't be fair. So the Pew report, and this is the most staggering statistic. According to the Pew report of February 2008, the largest single church in the United States is still the Catholic Church. And the second largest church, if we could count it that way, would be former Catholics. 30 million people who walk no more with us, at least by way of, now I think culturally and spiritually and existentially and by way of their own ontic being, their own way of being in the world. I think many of them are still deeply Catholic. But when they're asked questions about it, they say they're former Catholics or resigned Catholics or departed Catholics of one kind or another. And there is evidence that we're bleeding most profusely of our youth and of our young adults, of any mainstream Christian community. Negative, depressing statistics. Let's put them away quickly here. There is evidence too, as we were saying last night, Christian Smith and these people, that are young people who do embrace the faith are embracing a kind of therapeutic deism, kind of a nice guy God who makes no demands on their lives. We're talking about little relevance to everyday life. Yeah, they know about him, and they typically call him, of course. But knowing God in the deep heart core of their lives, when Jesus in John 17:4 says, eternal life is this, to know you, the one true God, and the one you sent, Jesus Christ. That's not the kind of knowing. That's a deep, relational, passionate, intimate type of knowing. It's fascinating that the Hebrew verb for to know is yada. And it was also used as a verb to make love. It says, and Adam had knowledge of Eve. Or in the New Testament, it's genoschein, but then it says, when Mary says to the angel, how can this be since I know not man? The biblical sense of knowing is a tremendously deep, passionate, relational, physical, emotional, spiritual, rational way of appropriating and becoming that which you know, where the epistemology and the ontology comes together, where the knowing and the being deeply affect each other. We've lost that sense of knowing, unfortunately. We lost it especially at the time of the whole Enlightenment movement, because we managed to separate out knowing from being, which was the first time in the history of the Western world we did that. I don't want to digress too far here, but when you do that, it's a very dangerous type of thing, because then you can end up with a PhD in theology and not believe in God. Or you can end up getting together. Kant was the one who really separated out critical reason from practical reason, as if the two were two different processes within two different people. But then we end up where scientists sit down around a table, as they did for the Manhattan Project, and ask, how will we do this? And nobody ever asks, should we do it? Is it wise? What will the consequences be? Because we'd separated out theoretical from practical reason. Don't do that in your religion program. And I'll come back to that a number of times, that if we think that, well, campus ministry is doing formation and the classroom is doing information, I think we're just buying into a whole dysfunctional epistemology that no longer serves us well. And actually, I find feminist scholars, feminist philosophers, are the ones who are alerting us most compellingly. Sandra Harding and people like that, to the difficulty or the problematic, the danger inherent in accepting that kind of dichotomous thinking, and that there is a way of knowing that deeply influences people's lives. There is a way of educating that engages hearts as well as heads, and invites people to judgments and decisions about how to be in the world. That'll be my presentation, basically, in our second hour together. But we can do better. There's little sense of responsibility, that they're in a covenant with God. The demands of faith really is not part of their consciousness. The anecdotal evidence, purely personal, and again, I hate to be discouraging. I don't mean to be discouraging at all. But I taught undergraduates at Boston College for 27 years, and I no longer, unfortunately, do so. As I said last night, hope to get back to it soon. Don't tell the president I said that, but it's the first chance I get, I'll give up my day job and go back to teaching full time. But I've, over the years, teaching undergraduate theology, it's fascinating. Many years ago, I went to the chair of my department. I was teaching a course on liberation theology. And but I was realizing here, I was trying to tell them the distinction between salvation and liberation, and how liberation might be a more adequate term for our time. And then I realized they didn't know what salvation meant. So I was trying to pose a revision of the original, and they didn't know the original. So I went into my chairperson, Father Bob Daly, a Jesuit, and I said, Bob, I want to teach an intro course called Catholicism 1, first semester, and Catholicism 2, second semester. And Bob said, oh, no, you can't, no, they wouldn't take it. Nobody would take it. You have to call it the human search for meaning or something like that. So I said, no, I'm calling it Catholicism 1 first semester, Catholicism 2 second semester. And he said, well, look, if you get 35 kids to sign up in pre-registration in May before the sophomores and juniors go home, if you get 35 kids to sign up, you can teach it. The first morning of registration, 1,400 students attempted to register for the course. So we've been teaching it ever since. It's kind of a bread and butter course for us now at Boston College. And but anyway, I'm rambling now. But it was, and I did it because a lot of these young people coming in, some of them very often coming in out of like excellent schools like your own, with advanced placement in chemistry and physics, and advanced placement in English, and advanced placement in all kinds of stuff. In other words, crackerjack, bright, well-educated students, but very often did not have a deep sense of knowledge of their Catholic Christian faith. So they come in with what I will distinguish. They come in with poor linguistic literacy, but they have a strong performative literacy in their faith. And I want to appreciate that, and especially its social responsibilities. I mean, my generation could tell you the distinction between the Immaculate Conception and the Virgin Birth. I mean, these kids wouldn't have a clue of what that's talking about. But on the other hand, my generation had no real sense that our faith demands the works of justice, that in fact justice is constitutive of the Christian gospel. Without justice and the commitment to justice, you're not preaching or teaching the gospel. So they have a tremendous sense of this here, but very poor linguistic literacy. So it's not as if we've done badly at all. I think we're in a moment of opportunity to honor both. That the two need each other. For many years, when I was teaching undergrads, I took we volunteered to cook breakfast at the Haley House, which is the Catholic Worker Soup Kitchen in downtown Boston. And they did it. I was always amazed at the generosity of these young people and how they'd come forward and volunteer repeatedly. And it was a real sacrifice. They'd get up at 4 a.m. in the morning and catch a 4:30 tea and get down there by 5:30 to put on the coffee, because our guests started coming around 6, and they would work through the morning until their 10 o'clock class time, and then there was always 5 or 6 of them came with me, and we'd ride home in the car. But I was constantly asking them questions like, why do you do this? Like, why did you volunteer? What prompted you to volunteer? Do you know why we do this? And after a while, you realize they need both. They need to know why and be able to explain the faith that is in them. As Peter put it, the two need each other. And I would say, by way of catechesis, that today's teens need well-informed, comprehensive, and an age-appropriate study of Catholic Christian faith. And so a little bit of this, and a little bit of that, and a little bit of something else, we can do better than that. We can have a serious scope and sequence. And it's a phenomenal tradition. I mean, the breadth and the height and the length and the depth of it, as Paul said about God's love, you'll never plumb it all. You'll never fathom it all. There'll always be more to be said. That the human word about God's word will never have the last word. As Ricoeur says, there's always this surplus there. So I've been studying it all my life, and I'm only beginning to appreciate the richness and the depths of it, and to recognize that indeed there's an extraordinary resource here, a tremendous source of spiritual wisdom for life that deserves rigorous study. It has to be an engaging pedagogy, I believe, of participation, of critical thinking, questioning, probing, analyzing. Aquinas, all the great thinkers of the tradition were convinced that the more you deeply you probe it, the more likely you are to come to faith. So often we mistakenly think that, oh, if you're questioning it, maybe that's hazardous. No, it'll deepen faith. It's a great legacy of our Catholic tradition, again, that reason and revelation are partners. And that's not a new idea. It goes way back. I mean, Augustine said it, Aquinas said it, Vatican I declared it as a kind of a dogma of our faith, that reason needs revelation and revelation needs reason, because without reason, revelation can become crazy and religion can become terribly dangerous. And yet you can't reason your way into faith. Faith enriches reason. So the critical thinking is integral to it, and why would we ever do otherwise? So it should never be any kind of indoctrination. It's antithetical to good Catholic theology. Augustine used the word Catholic as to be open to the truth wherever it can be found. To be open to truth wherever you can find it. That's what it means to be Catholic. Now, he also used it in the traditional sense of the inclusivity of the church, but he frequently used the term to say be open to the truth wherever you find it. And when you think about it, the whole Western academic enterprise, in large part, or 90% of it, was founded out of this Catholic Christian tradition. The great Benedictine monasteries of the 6th, 7th, 8th century that began the whole educational process of the Western world. And then, of course, the great Celtic monasteries who then saved civilization for all of us, as you know. But they were the monasteries that led on to the great cathedral schools, led on to the founding of the great universities, Salamanca, Paris, Oxford, Bologna, Cambridge. They were all founded by papal charter. They were all staffed by the emerging religious orders, the Benedictines, the Augustinians, and then later the Dominicans and Franciscans, and later still the Jesuits. I mean, the whole intellectual life of the Western world, was founded in large part out of this tradition. And there was a great debate in the early church. Should the church be involved in education? I'm just mentioning this because Ernest used a phrase last night that I want to just highlight. I think it was Ernest that mentioned it, that in those early centuries, there was a debate broke out that should the church be simply isn't it enough to simply teach the gospel? And Tertullian championed that position and said, the church Jerusalem has no need of Athens. That we have it in Jerusalem, so why do we go to the philosophers and the liberal arts and the reading, writing, and rhetoric and all the rest of it of the Greeks? We have the Word of God through Scripture. Let's just teach that. Well, wiser minds and hearts prevailed. Clement of Alexandria was the one who I've heard first using the phrase that somebody, I think it was Ernest, that used last night, because the great debate was, should we be doing just religious education or general education as well? And Clement came back and said, to give a child a good education is always a work of salvation, regardless of what path they may take home to God. It's always a work of salvation. I think it was Dennis maybe that said in his introductory remarks that in a sense you're always in the business of saving souls. That's what we do for a living, by the grace of God. We're in the business of saving souls, which I don't mean the ghost in the machine of the body as Descartes used it, but in the biblical sense. The soul is the whole person, it's our whole personhood, and all the ways that we can lose our souls in this world of ours. It's a lot easier to save them later than it is to save them here, I think. And all the temptations and drugs and addictions and hazards and then when we get into adult life, you can lose your soul to your job, to your corporation, to the business, to the bank, to the church. You can lose your soul in so many ways. So giving young people the kind of education that helps to save their souls is really what we're about. And that deserves critical thinking, study, discernment, that it's always a work of salvation. Encouraging them to make the faith their own and to appropriate its spiritual wisdom for their lives. That needs good theology, needs good education, always toward conversion, not just to know about. You can teach a religion at least three levels. You can teach it so that people come to know about it. This is Michael Grimmett, a great English religious education theorist. You can teach it so that people know about it, or you can teach it so that people learn from it, or you can teach it so that people become it. In other words, take it on as their identity. Now, let me propose that that first level is not our interest. Of course, you have to teach them about it, but that's not where you would rest. That you would not be satisfied with that. There's a way to teach that that even if without manipulating them to take it on as their identity, the third level, there is a way to teach it so that at least they learn from it for their lives. So that even if they don't become card-carrying party members of the Catholic Church, that they at least are tremendously enriched by their exposure to this great rich tradition. And our hope is that they actually may choose it as their personal identity and faith. But there is a way to teach it so that they not only learn about it, but that they learn from it for their lives. Or if you're teaching world religions, don't teach Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism just so they can 5 pillars of Islam and they can cross them off an exam. But what does that mean? I mean, they'd be better off learning something useful. But if you enable them to learn from it, if you bring them into reflecting on it and appropriating it and seeing the wisdom, the potential wisdom and relevance it might have for their lives, then you're into getting them to learn from it. You're not trying to make them Muslims, but yet they should be confronted. Yeah, why do they pause 5 times a day to turn toward Mecca and to honor God and the presence of God? Is there anything we could learn from that? I mean, do you ever try recognizing the presence of God in your daily life? How would we do that? Now, probably we won't get prayer mats and turn toward Mecca, but isn't there a tremendous resource, a tremendous wisdom to be learned from that practice of our Islamic brothers and sisters? And you can go on to any aspect of the great traditions. We can be enriched by them, learn from them, not to cross over, not to take on a smorgasbord or a smoothie in religion, where you have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of something else, a little bit of something else, and you blend them all together, and you know what you're eating. No, young people, and ourselves included, need a grounding in the particular. But our attempt should be to ground them in the particular in ways that opens them to the universal, to the universality of God's love, God's saving intentions, God's self-disclosure. But they do need a home within God's family. But then you remember that we have a rich home, a wonderful home, but you also remember, as he put it himself, in my Father's house there are many, 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 many mansions. So we don't need to pretend that we're the only home within God's family, and yet they need a home and a grounding within God's family. And then, if we do it well, the openness to learn from others and be enriched by encountering others and so on will come readily. But it needs good theology, good education towards conversion to Jesus, to discipleship is really what we're after. Now, this is Lonergan. Lonergan would say, but watch it. If any of you are familiar with Lonergan's work, a number of you are, he had this fascinating attempt to reconnect what Kant had separated, to reconnect critical reason with practical reason. And of course, he learned it from Aquinas. It comes straight out of Thomas Aquinas. Now, Lonergan developed it in all kinds of ways. But he says there's 4 dynamics to cognition. In other words, you definitely want people to know. You want they come to your class, they're coming to learn. You want them to know. Well, to know what? To know could be to know math, to know English, to know geography, history, but we're talking about to know their faith. Now, Lonergan would say that if you're to truly know, if you're to enable people to know something, then there's a kind of a 4-fold cumulative dynamic that has to transpire. You need people indeed to know the data, to pay attention to the data, to pay attention to it, to recognize it, to be aware of it, to know it. But you also want them to understand it, and you want them to understand their faith. So you want them to know the data of their faith. You want them to understand their faith. Now, he would say that unfortunately most pedagogy ends there, and that we content ourselves. If they know the stuff and understand it, hey, we've done a good job, right? They'll get good grades. And Lonergan says, well, then he's not talking just about faith. He's talking about, at that point, you've stopped short of authentic cognition. Because authentic cognition should bring them to judgments and to decisions about what they know and what they understand. And the judgments are where you move, and I'll show pedagogically in my second hour with you, where I think these dynamics can be honored very intentionally and very consistently, and the type of questioning and the questioning activities that encourage it. But Loninger would say, you know, unless you ask them, look, what do you think yourself? Does that make any sense to you? Is that true? Is it false? Would it be useful? Is it insightful? What would you do with it? Can you imagine taking this seriously? If you did, what might happen? And unless that kind of judgment is encouraged, and then decisions. So what do you think yourself? Well, so where do you stand now? So are there any decisions emerging? Uh, what can we do with this? Supposing somebody took this seriously, what difference would it make in their lives, etc., etc.? I taught undergrad theology, as I said, for 27 years, and I used this consistently, teaching that course for about 20 of those years called Catholicism. And in that course, I had umpteen people from all kinds of backgrounds. About 60, 70% of the student body at any given time would be Catholic, but the other 30% was Jews, Muslims, Baptists, all kinds of people. And I would say to them, look, you know, I would ask them to state what was their faith, their religious tradition, just to get to know the diversity that was in the class. Not publicly, but they'd write it up. But I'd say to them, you know, when they come in to see me, I'd say, you know, now, Muhammad, at the end of this course, I want you to be a better Muslim. You know that. By this exposure to this great, rich tradition that we call Catholicism, I want you to learn from it for your life. Become a better Muslim. And, you know, Van Steele, I hope you're a better, or Featherson Hall, I hope you're a better Episcopalian at the end of this, you know. And Murphy, maybe you'd like to become a better Catholic at the end of your exposure to this course. In other words, to learn from it, but they don't learn from it, I think, unless we bring them to judgments and decisions for their lives, toward the personal wisdom, toward spiritual wisdom for their lives. Let me bring you back into the conversation. I should have done this about 5-10 minutes ago. But take your pen and paper and respond to what I've been saying thus far. How do you see things? What is your sense of the present state of adolescent age catechesis? And you have and I don't mean at all to just do a negative reading of it. I think there's extraordinary things going on, extraordinary possibilities and potential, and great stuff happening. But as you look around you in your context or situation, how would you name the present state of adolescent age catechesis? Think about that for a moment. Around your sense of it all, what is needed, how to provide it. Floor is open. Let's take 5 and hear from 5 or 6 people. Thoughts, comments? Please. Please.
We were talking about how it's very, right now it's like very trend-based, and by the time adults pick up on a trend, it's usually like already past the point where it's functional.
Yes.
So like, he was saying how like he started to go paperless and started to try to email students, and by the time he did that, they'd already moved on to like Facebook or whatever the case is. And then by the time you build the Facebook wall, they moved on to the next trend, and so it's tough to keep up with.
Yes.
All their latest trends, but you also, on the other hand, want to try to meet them where they're at, to try to give them a way of communicating in a way that's comfortable with them. So
Yes.
it's a constant battle on that end.
Yes, yes. But I'm naive and traditional enough to think that there's no substitute for the personal, face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball.
We end up moving to that end of it. So relationships end up being more important.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. Because so much of the panic to be in touch. It's amazing. The other night at this show, the Promises, when the break time came at the end of Act 1, the 3 people to my left, and to my left, and 3 people to my right, all 6 people immediately took out their iPods, iTouches, iMacs, whatever they are, and started texting, started getting emails. And they weren't young people, they were older people. And you say to yourself now, what's going on? Obviously, the longing, the hunger, the human desire for contact, for relationship, to be in touch, to be recognized, for somebody to know where you are, for somebody to give a care about where, in fact, you are, etc. So all of that existential human need for relationship is what's probably driving this. But I mean, I wanted to turn to the person beside me and say, what do you think? Are you enjoying it? Isn't he great? You see my brother-in-law up there? Yeah, it's my brother. Oh. She wasn't interested at all. She was just, you know. So I went out and had a drink and, you know, talked to somebody else. But the hunger will always be there. But I don't think there's anything that can satisfy it the way the person-to-person can satisfy it. Yeah. But it's a great point. You were going to say. Right?
Looking at the and connecting with Lonergan a little bit as well, I think things have flipped a bit in the sense that I think as adults we're very comfortable in inviting young people into being about it.
Yes.
Doing the service work, going on the mission trips, having that experience.
Yes.
Serving at the Catholic worker,
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
those
yeah.
kinds of things.
Which is gold dust.
Which is.
Yeah, so we won't ever say that.
Right, but then I think sometimes we can experience a level of uncomfortableness with the about it.
Yeah.
So, it's easier to invite and we enjoy,
Yeah.
because it goes back to that relationship thing. The texting and stuff, it's puddle deep. They're looking for the deeper relationship. They're looking for the connection. And service is a way to do that.
Yeah.
But do we then go back and provide the literacy? Do we go back and provide the foundation, the grounding,
Yeah.
the time for reflection?
Now, let me ask you a question. Why do you think we're hesitant about going to the grounding?
Because personally, I think from my experience, sometimes the hesitancy that either I experience from time to time or I see my colleagues experiencing is because when we start looking at the about it and some of what the church teaches, in terms of dogma, but in terms of faith, looking at those things, that can raise a level of uncomfortableness in
Yes.
addressing some of the social situations in our world today.
Yes. Well, great point.
So then, as adults, we tend to step away from it because have we made the connection that we need to make in our lives, or have we come to a sense of being able to be articulate with our uncomfortableness about some of those
Yes.
issues, and in being present to the young people, that we are in conversation. It's that Emmaus encounter. We're walking, we're in conversation, we're figuring it out, and so I think sometimes personally we have that sense of uncomfortableness with the way things are lining up. But then for the young people, we know they're going to raise the questions of the clash of their youth culture with the about it or the knowing it, the teaching of it.
Yeah.
And so then the challenge is, do we continue in our reflection to go deep enough so that we own the words to be able to shed light and continue to invite them in? So that
Great points. Marvelous. Marianne, right?
Yeah.
Marianne. Marvelous summary. Really, thank you. Well said. And I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. There's a dreadful discomfort for many of us around issues that our church is now proclaiming as if they were central to our identity. I mean, you swear to goodness that the only social issue we care about is abortion. Now, we care deeply about abortion and the right to life, but my goodness. 25 years ago, our bishops were issuing papal or pastoral letters on the economy, on peacemaking. But now there's only one issue that occupies it. It's embarrassing. Or gay marriage. I mean, what a threat to my marriage. I don't think so. Or you can take our women's rights issues in the church and so on. But I suppose, this is very naive probably, but that's where I was trying to say last night. I think we have to refocus our vision on Jesus. That text in Luke 4, where it says, where he went in and looked for Isaiah 61 and raised it up, and it says, and all eyes in the synagogue were fixed upon him. And in a sense, I know this sounds very pious, and I hope it doesn't sound like pious piffle, but in a sense, fixing our gaze on Jesus, again, as the center and core of our faith. That's what we're trying to bring young people to. Now, we'll have to deal with those other difficult issues. But we're in a situation, in my opinion, in our church right now, that about 10% of our church is representing the other 90%. And probably the other 90% disagree with a great deal of what that smaller minority are saying. And unfortunately, many of our bishops and leadership have been drawn from that smaller voice. And it is a more restorationist voice, a more traditionalist voice. And especially around these hot-button issues. But I think we have to find the common ground. We have to find the common ground. Bernadine was right in that project. We have to find the common ground. I think our common ground is discipleship to Jesus Christ. And it's ironic and a blessing that our church, in all its official documents, is now saying this. There was an article in the New York Times the Sunday after John Paul II died, who referred to him as the evangelical pope. That he was actually evangelical in his emphasis on the centrality of Jesus Christ to our faith. And also, there's other aspects of the tradition that are helpful around these issues. I mean, the Catechism talks about it. Vatican II talked about it, the hierarchy of truths. There's a hierarchy of truths to our faith. And there are some major league truths. The divinity and humanity of Jesus Christ, the blessed, the Holy Trinity, the real presence of the risen Christ in Eucharist. The obvious, there are great major league truths, but then there are minor league truths, and then there are local league and peewee league stuff. And we often, and the media often makes it sound as if the peewee stuff is really what's central. And it's not. But if we get bogged down in the now I don't mean to make those issues sound as if they're unimportant, but I remember one day in class there was two people were in a violent, or almost violent, argument, a very intense argument around the issue of the ordination of women. And one woman was totally in favor of it, and the other was totally opposed. And they went back and forth, and finally one of them said, "Well, Tom, what do you think?" Of course, I said, "Well, I'm not even allowed to think about it. As a Catholic theologian, you can't even think about it. It's like one of those bad thoughts they warned you about as an adolescent, you know, that you weren't even to think about it." I said, "I'm not even to think about it." I said, "What amazes me, though, is how much agreement there is between the two of you." And they looked at me and said, "Well, you weren't listening again." I said, No, I was listening." I said, "But look at all the agreement that's between you. Both of you are deeply concerned about the sacramental economy of our church. Both of you are deeply grounded in a conviction about holy orders, that it really is a vital sacrament to Catholic Christian faith and spirituality. Both of you are deeply concerned, I've heard you say it, about access to Eucharist and to ready access and consistent access to Eucharist. So central to our faith." So I said, there's all kinds of issues about both. There's common ground on which you're standing. Now you're disagreeing on who should and who shouldn't. But I think if we lose, but both of them, they weren't arguing about the validity of the sacrament of holy orders or the importance of Eucharist to Christian Catholic faith at all. That was common ground. What they were arguing about is who gets to do what. Now, I don't mean to dismiss that as unimportant, not at all. But I think we have to cling and find the common ground, or as you said, Mary Ann, go deep enough into it till we find great rivers of truth and meaning and life that make up this huge, whatever, lake and river that is Catholic Christian faith. Like our understanding of the person is in many ways, you wouldn't say it's unique to us, but it's an enormously positive understanding of who we are, and that we're in the image and likeness of God, and the divine image was never lost to us. And we push back against the reformers, Calvin and especially Luther as well, that we're not a massive peccati, a massive sin, that we really are. We're not sinners in the hands of an angry God. We're good people in the hands of a loving God. I mean, that's the Catholic anthropology. Rahner, Schillebeeckx, Aquinas. Augustine had a little trace of Manichaeism that he brought with him into Christian faith, unfortunately. But nonetheless, basically a very positive understanding of the human existence, of the world, of life in the world, that it's all sacramental, that you can come to see God in all things, that God is always present, and the Spirit of God is moving in the ordinary and the everyday, the whole sacramentality of life in the world. And that's why we have the audacity then to show up in our churches and to believe that our God comes looking for us through bread and wine and water and oil and love-making in marriage. Don't you love the old traditional Catholic theology of marriage? Now, have we always honored it? Have we ever taught it? No, we're dreadful. I mean, the theology of the body is one of the weakest aspects of our tradition. But we have the potential of a very positive one. I mean, we believe that our God actually became one of us in Jesus of Nazareth. I mean, what a phenomenal claim about the human condition and the dignity of it. But I always love the fact that it's not a sacrament until they make love. The sacrament is not at the altar, it's in the marriage bed after the wedding ceremony. You know, I taught undergrads, as I said, for many years, and I always had to put in little details like that. But the sacrament is made in the act of lovemaking. What a lovely theology of human relationality and lovemaking. So the tradition is rife with this kind of stuff. So that's the stuff to be bringing them to. Somebody complimented me last night in a little book I wrote some years ago called What Makes Us Catholic? And I mentioned, of course, we're anti-abortion, but then even within the context of our time, how do you go about being pro-life? Because we'll probably never manage to ban and to criminalize, and probably shouldn't ever return to criminalizing abortion. So then what do? Well, you work for a reduction of it. Can be done. The Dutch did it. The Dutch have 1/3 of our abortion rate. The Germans have 1/3 of our abortion rate. The Swedes have half of our abortion rate. Why? Because they've good they have good prenatal, natal, and postnatal care for poor women, or for women with or people with unplanned pregnancy. So we can do all kinds of marvelous things in our society with this commitment. But the way we're going about it is just, it's not raising up the richness and the blessings of it. Anyway, I'm off on a roll here, and this isn't what I came to talk about at all. Just give me a break. Yeah, take a break and tell me something else.
I just wanted to maybe follow up a little on Mary Ann's comment on the relational aspect, but taking a longer view.
Okay.
This is where our provincial, there he is, he's not allowed to listen when we're about this.
Okay.
Because essentially what I wanted to kind of talk about was, I had the remarkable experience this summer of being asked as a brother to be asked to be involved in the wedding ceremonies of 3 alumni of our school.
Okay.
And I mean, there's separate situations. One was a lakeside wedding here in New Jersey, and another one was in a banquet hall down in Washington, D.C. Anyway, the whole thing, none of it was essentially traditionally Catholic religion. But what was important for the couple was that there be the face of the church somehow, and that face of the church was one, I think in their minds, was an accessible, friendly face of the church, and it was still important for them to have something, connected to them. And then maybe they were trying to appease their parents who were upset that they were not getting married in a church. There might have been a million and one different motivations. But I'm going back to your little statistic where you said that 1,400 kids signed up for that course. That says to me that there is this some deeper existential level.
Yes.
There is something going on with these young people. Maybe they're not finding that fulfilled in the traditional structures that we have kind of, that they're, maybe in their parishes or whatever it might be. But that we, as educators, religious educators, evangelizers, have, I think, prime opportunity to present a really compassionate face of the church that draws these young people in and says, okay, I don't know if I'm going to be a true blue, dyed-in-the-wool Catholic, but this is important to me. And maybe over the course of time, over the course of a lifetime, they may evolve and mature.
Yeah. Because there'll be other times. Great point. I love it. I always say, and let's agree on this, it's always better to bring them along than to drive them away. Wouldn't you say? So you bring them along because there'll be different times in their lives. And then 50, 20, 30 years from now, they'll have a young son or daughter who's hoping to God that they're not sleeping with their boyfriend at Boston College, even though they are now doing that themselves. But give them time, And it's always better to bring them along than to hunt them, to drive them away. That whole inclusivity we talked about in Jesus. No, it's a great point. And they do need, they are looking for that positive. And when they come to us and say, look, I've heard that, you've heard it 100 times, I hear it all the time from undergrads. Professor, I'm spiritual, not religious. And I say, that's the best news I've heard in a long time. You really recognize your own spiritual being? Do you know what we do for a living? Do you know what we are? Do you know what our church is? Do you know what our tradition is? At its best, it's a great spirituality. That's really what it is. It's for the soul. It's for the spirit. It's sure we organize it as a religion. We have to do that. Somebody has to turn out the lights and turn them on and pay the bills and run the show a little bit. But or there be nobody home. But I mean, we're really a spirituality. Boy, are you ever in the right place at the right time? I mean, that's a wonderful place for young people to be, to know that they are spiritual. But then think of the resources we have to nurture their spirituality, to give life to their spirituality. It's tremendous potential. Brother. Jim.
I'm amazed at how, if you look through the New York Times and see all the movies that are coming out, all have to do with monsters, supernatural beings, things like this. Look at the Twilight series.
Yes.
That has just swept right through the adolescence. So I took it up and I'm reading it and I'm fascinated by it. But it all has to do with something which is extra, beyond.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yes.
Look at what happened to Da Vinci Code.
Yes.
The Passion of Jesus.
Harry Potter, you know, the whole thing, yeah.
So, and then I look at the comics that kids read today. There are all these spiky things that just do terrible things. And even when we do in artwork in the class, they always have to get something with spikes on it.
Yeah, I don't know about the spikes. I know that. We have the crown of thorns. We could offer them that, maybe.
They'll have, for somebody that will have spikes coming out of his head.
And you see, I think you're making the point, Jim, that this is who we are. At a deep level, we're not really... It'd be more accurate to say of us, not that we're human beings who have a spirituality, but rather we're spiritual beings who have a humanity. Because we're made in the image and likeness of God. Genesis chapter 1, let us make humankind in our own image and likeness. And so God made us in God's own image and likeness. Male and female God made them. And made us sexual beings, male and female, not people. Gave us an identity in our own sexuality from the beginning. And then Genesis 2, verse 7 says, and God breathed. Now all of these are symbolic and metaphorical stories. I don't believe them literally, but they're tremendous truths. They teach extraordinary truths. That God breathes the breath of God's own life. And that Ha-Adam, this earth person, Adam, not man as we have traditionally translated, but Ha-Adam, this earth person, became nephesh, became alive with the life of God. So what an extraordinary sense that we have of ourselves and who we are. So then to find young people still looking for and being interested in and disposed to the enchanted world, or whatever we want to call this, that's what Taylor calls it, should not surprise us at all. But then that's our opportunity. That's the vacuum or the void into which we can step and have a tremendous story to tell. Yeah, it'll be always there. And, you know, Ron or all of them have said this type of thing. Well, let me push on a little.